Hello athletes, Travis here, back with another training talk, and for today's topic I'm going to be focusing on the question of training volumes. How much training volume is appropriate for you, how to determine that amount, how much volume is appropriate based on what your competitive goals are, and I'm going to be focusing very specifically within the sport of rowing and kind of the main distances and what is common in the sport of rowing. In particular, middle distance competition, middle distance really being anything falling in the 1,000 and 2,000 meter range, maybe going down to 500 meters, and then distance being kind of more of the head race distances. All right, so mid distance and distance are kind of the common competitive arenas for our sport. And the good thing about that is that the training for both middle distance and distance is extremely similar, particularly in the general aerobic base building phase. All right, there starts to be a little bit of distinction as you move into the pre-competition and the competitive phases, but that is simply because you're training for a pace that you're either going to hold for 3 miles versus 1,000 meters or 2,000 meters. But another thing that's going to make this easy is the fact that your UT2 volume, all right, UT2 being the primary training category for rowing, your UT2 training volume is going to dictate the volume that you're spending or devoting to all your other training intensities. All right, your UT1, your anaerobic threshold, your oxygen transport, your lactate production or removal, or your lactate tolerance, and even your anaerobic lactate is so small that you're pretty much going to get the same volume of that no matter what when you're getting into competitive phase. But this is going to make my job easier, all right? So the bulk of this is going to be talking about how to determine the appropriate duration of your UT2 steady state sessions and your overall UT2 volume in your training. All right, so I have talked about kind of how to break down and how to determine those faster training categories in other videos, but in the interest of consolidation, I'm going to do a quick review here. Now, granted, I haven't prepared these specific breakdowns, and so if I said something in those other videos that focuses specifically on UT1 or transport or whatnot, take that over what I'm going to do here in the summary. All right, but let's go. UT1, all right. A typical UT1 session is going to last approximately half of what your median UT2 session is, all right? And so if the majority of my UT2 sessions are 60 minutes, and occasionally I will do a longer 80 or 90 minute session, and then for my easier days, I'm gonna do 30 minutes or so of UT2, all right? That median session of 60 minutes is going to determine the amount of UT1 volume that I'm doing when I'm doing a UT1 session, all right? So, and that is gonna be approximately half, maybe down to 1/3 of that volume, particularly more closer to 1/3 if you are at an extreme end of low UT2 volume or a very high UT2 volume, you might be closer to 1/3. But let's say if 60 minutes is your median UT2 session, then 30 minutes is going to be an appropriate UT1 duration. Now moving to anaerobic threshold. Anaerobic threshold volumes tend to be extremely similar to your UT1 volumes. And so I would say somewhere between 2/3 of your UT1 volume is going to be appropriate for an anaerobic threshold session. And then moving on to your oxygen transport, all right? Your transport volume is going to be approximately 1/2 and maybe a little bit less than 1/2. So maybe like, 4/10 of your UT1 volume, all right? So if you're putting in 30 minutes of UT1, then 15 minutes of transport is probably gonna be appropriate volume. Maybe down to 12 minutes of oxygen transport is gonna be acceptable. And you might even push into 18 minutes of transport, maybe going a little bit beyond that 1/2 marker if you are getting close to your pre-competitive phase, all right? So if you're deep into, you've spent lots and lots of months in your general base building phase and you're getting close to, or you have moved into your anaerobically focused training phases. So that's transport. Your lactate production or removal is actually not going to be as dependent upon your UT2. It's going to be a little bit more focused on your desired race distance. All right, for middle distance events, your lactate workouts are generally going to be anywhere from 1 to 2 times your racing volume. All right, so if you're racing 2,000 meters, then your lactate workouts are generally going to be anywhere from 2,000 meters to 4,000 meters. And for the majority of athletes, you're going to be in the 1 to 1.5 range. All right, so that 2,000 to 3,000 meters of volume of lactate work for the vast majority of athletes. And then that anaerobic lactate work, that is all just very, very short. You're talking about fractions of % of your training volume. It's more, you should focus more on just making sure that you are fresh for each of those repetitions, which are generally somewhere between the 10 and 15 stroke range. So we're talking about things like, practicing starts, practicing little builds at race pace, or practicing maximal accelerations, going from 0 to full speed, for maybe 8 to 12 strokes. All right, so that you don't have to worry so much about volume, because you're mostly focused on just getting an amount of reps that you're fresh for each one of them. So that is kind of the general breakdown and summary. Going back to UT2, how much UT2 should you be doing? All right, the amount of UT2 that you're doing is going to be based, one, primarily upon where you have been recently with your training. That you do not want to kind of get lulled into the sense of, well, this is my goal and this is what people who are successful with that goal are doing, therefore that is what I need to be doing. That is true in a sense, all right? Certainly you do need to put in a certain amount of volume to be successful at a given level of competition. However, you should never forget where you're coming from in your goal of getting to that place, all right? And so I would say, in general, if you're in an optimized place and you've had lots of time to prepare and build to this point, that your usual aerobic training sessions should at least equal the amount of time that you would expect to be spending preparing for and racing. All right, so if you are racing a 2,000 meter race, then you are probably going to spend about 60 minutes on the water. All right, so that means that you should be extremely comfortable working for 60 minutes. All right, so 60 minutes steady state is going to be key. If you are head racing, all right, then you might expect to spend closer to maybe 80 to 90 minutes on the water between warming up, kind of drilling and getting ready, and then racing that head race. And if that's the case, if you are spending that amount of time for that head race, then you need to be very comfortable spending that amount of time in a constant work state. All right, and so yes, you can say, well, if I'm warming up, then I'm also spending a lot of time sitting and stopping. That doesn't matter. All right, if you need to spend 60 minutes on the water between launch and dock for your race, then you need to be comfortable working for 60 minutes. All right, and then same thing for head racing. And that is a big reason why I think it is absolutely absurd, particularly for youth coaches, because college coaches usually aren't dumb enough to do this, of racing multiple head race events in the same day. All right, so youth coaches love to give their athletes more race experience, and they will throw them in a 4 and an 8 for a head race. Now, I come from a running background, cross country and track and field, and no cross country coach is irresponsible enough to demand that their athletes race 2 full effort cross-country events in the same day. It is absolutely absurd. One, you can't do it, all right? You are not going to be able to produce 2 maximal performances. Now, in rowing, you have the benefit of hiding within a crew for the most part, all right? And so you can stick an athlete in an 8, and you're not going to know how shitty and mediocre their second performance is and how substandard that first performance is, because they know they have a second race coming that day. It's all going to be kind of blended in the overall performance of that boat, all right? But if they were racing in a single, it's going to be very obvious, how compromised their peak performance is going to be by racing twice, all right? So that is my little side rant there. Do not race 2 head races on the same day unless you really don't care about your max performance and you just like going down a race course and you have fun doing that. Then do whatever you want. I don't care. But if you're trying to perform at a high level and you're trying to be competitive, then don't race twice on a head race course in one day. So we can go back to the volume. And why did I get on that rant? Well, if someone's saying, well, I'm going to be spending, 2.5 hours on the race course today because I've got 2 head races. Well, you don't need to be spending 2.5 hours on your steady state sessions. All right, just focus on what you need for the single head race session. So 80 to 90 minutes of water time. All right, now that I kind of got that rant out of the way, let's kind of pull myself back and let's go to the question of, well, let's say, I'm going to say with confidence that if you want to be competitive in the sport of rowing at the traditional rowing distances, 1,000 meters, 2,000 meters beyond, that you should at least be putting in 60 minutes in your primary UT2 sessions. All right, you can go beyond that. I wouldn't go to the point where your standard UT2 sessions are exceeding 80 to 90 minutes, all right, with your long sessions being up to 120 to 150 minutes that you would do probably once every 10 days or so. But for the most part, if you want to compete at high level, you need to be able to put in 60 minutes of good quality work on a regular basis, all right? But then you can say, well, I'm not there yet, so how do I get to that point? All right, and that is a question that I definitely want to invest some time talking about. All right, so if you are just getting into it, all right, if you are either a novice in the sport or you're just coming into the sport, maybe you're a CrossFit athlete that's taken to rowing and you want to focus a little bit more specifically on rowing in the traditional rowing distances, or you're just kind of an adult athlete picking this up later in life and you want to be competitive with it, then you got to start somewhere, all right? And so, and even this would kind of be applied to athletes, and this is something I can definitely empathize with, is that if you were competitive previously in your life and you took a long break and you want to try to get competitive again, how do you get to that point? How do you build from nothing back to being competitive, all right? And so the starting point is this, all right? You want to sit down on an erg and you want to get warmed up and settle into your UT2 pace, and you want to continue that UT2 pace as long as you can remain focused on the quality of your strokes and the quality of your execution, and you want to be there, all right? Or at least that you're not kind of just counting down the strokes and the minutes to when you're done, all right? You want to be able to sit there and stay focused, and you can be challenged, but you do not want to continue to the point where your rowing is a slog, all right? Where you're just fighting to get the miles in and fighting to get to whatever pre-prescribed distance that you're going. So sit down on an erg and do that. And if for you that's 40 minutes, then 40 minutes is it. 40 minutes is your primary UT2 volume right then and right at that time. For me, I've spent a large part of my 30s at a point where 10 minutes was that amount of time, where 10 minutes was all I could do, to focus and kind of enjoy being there, where I wasn't like, oh God, I just want to do anything else, all right? So for me, 10 minutes was a UT2. Now back in my day, 10 minutes wasn't even my warm-up, all right? My warm-up was usually 20 to 30 minutes or so, and sometimes as much as 60 minutes if I was doing a 2-hour plus row, all right? I would look at 10 minutes and be like, what do you mean 10 minutes for a UT2? But at a different point in my life, all right, when I had taken an extended break from the sport, or when I was recovering from cancer and chemotherapy and that long kind of multi-year process of my body healing and getting back into it, and then me getting back into the habits of being an athlete, 10 minutes was it, all right? 10 minutes was my UT2. So you find whatever that volume is, 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes, whatever it is, and then the key from there is repetition, all right? Is that you repeat that distance, all right? And you repeat it on a day-to-day basis, all right? And if it's longer, like if you're 30 minutes or above for that time, then don't repeat it every day the same thing. Then you want to start to moderate days that are your normal distance, and then days that are about half of that distance. So if 30 minutes is that amount of time that you get, where you can stay fresh and engaged and you can enjoy it, then your shorter days, you're going to alternate 30 minutes and 50 minutes, 30 minutes and 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 15 minutes, all right? If you're doing less than 30 minutes in a session, if you're doing 10 or 20 minutes is kind of your road, then you can do 10, 20 minutes every day. It's no big deal. All right, but repetition, all right? Keep getting those in. And if you keep getting those in, then your body and your mind are going to very quickly start to condition to where, you know what, adding another 5 minutes is no big deal, all right? And I'm gonna feel just the same rowing 45 minutes as I was rowing 40 minutes, or that I'm gonna feel just as fine rowing 15 minutes as I was rowing 10 minutes. And you're gonna continue doing that again and again, and then weeks after weeks, until you can add another 5 minutes, and you can still kind of maintain that focus and that feeling of kind of engagement and enjoyability with that training. And while you're doing that, I would also every 5 or 6 sessions add in a steady state that kind of pushes you, all right? So add in a volume that is maybe anywhere from a third to half longer, maybe even a quarter if you're kind of at the larger end of the volume, more than that what that traditional is, all right? And so if I'm rowing 30 minutes is where I'm good and fresh. You know, once every week or two, throw in a session that's 40 minutes, all right? And then continue that until you get to the point where 35 minutes is fine, and then once every week or two, do a 45-minute session, all right? And then continue that into where eventually you get to the point where 40 minutes is fine, and then every week or two add in a 50 or 60-minute session, all right? And so you do want to periodically push your stress, push that threshold, push that focus, push that volume with a longer session, all right? But that is not your norm, all right? Work within yourself and work within your ability. And that is gonna be how you determine what is an appropriate UT2 volume and how to progressively build. And this building process could take months, it could take a year or two, all right? I don't think it should take anybody more than a year to build to the point where you can put 60 minutes in and feel fresh and engaged and focused, and do that on a day in and day out basis, all right? And so a year is typical. And when I was coaching, particularly at the youth level with novices, one of my goals for myself to make sure that I had properly prepared those athletes to kind of make that step to varsity for the next year was that at the end of that novice year, they should be able to put in 60 minutes of high quality, focused, technically solid aerobic steady state for that 60-minute time period, all right? Now, they started at a point where on the first day, it was about 4 minutes, all right? So I really want to ask kind of a first week athlete to sit down and focus on good quality work for more than 3-4 minutes, maybe 5 minutes if they were more mature athletes, all right? And so there's a long progression that's happening there. And you, in order to create sustainability and longevity in your training, you need to be honest with yourself in that practice, all right? You know, and I talk about enjoyment because if you don't enjoy what you're doing, that there is going to be a half-life to what you are doing, all right? And if you're really tough, really focused, really goal-oriented, that half-life may be 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. But let's be honest, like you should, any activity, athletic activity that you're engaged in, you should enjoy enough that you would want to do that for the rest of your life, and you're not going to get burned out. And rowing is really good at burning out its athletes, and that is due in a large part to the competitive scene at the youth level and the competitive scene at the college level, where those college coaches, they really don't give a fuck if you're rowing if you're 30, 35 years old. They might say they do. You know, they might say, oh, it feels really good when someone comes back and they said they continued. But the vast majority of those coaches, you know, they are focused on performing at a high level and keeping their job, particularly the high level ones, all right? They're focused on achieving maximal performance, and they want to get you to your peak as a senior on that team. And if they make decisions in terms of an accelerated volume build or an overly intense training schedule or an anaerobic heavy training composition, then they don't care. All right. And so, they're not going to lose sleep over the fact that 10 years after you won the NCAA championship, you are no longer rowing because that really kind of burned you out and you really don't want to row anymore. All right. They just don't care. All right. And certainly there are going to be exceptions, of course, but for the most part, they don't. So, but for me, I'm saying that you want to be able to, certainly if you're watching this, probably the majority of people that are watching this aren't on a team in school. You are kind of rowing in general, after your school years, because you're getting the majority of your information from a YouTube video and not from your team coach. All right. So ideally, you want to enjoy what you're doing and kind of making sure that you're training within a volume that you can stay mentally fresh and that you can get at the end of that session feeling invigorated and feeling like you are proud of yourself and you're happy you did it and you look forward to the next time you can do it. Then that is going to be key to what you're taking out of the sport and that progression of volume. All right. And so for me, last year when I kind of got into rowing again, it was 10 minutes, and I started that training vlog kind of last, I think it was August maybe, when I did my first kind of stints of training vlogs. I think I got maybe a dozen or maybe 15 into it before my computer crashed and I couldn't actually produce any videos for a couple months until my computer fixed. But when I did that, I started out and I was doing 10-15 minutes. And then my longer session was 20 minutes. And I did a progression where I basically did that for a week or 2 weeks. And then the next week I bumped it up 10 minutes. All right. So I spent a week doing 20 minutes a day. And then on the weekend I did 30 minutes. And then the next week I was doing 25-30 minutes every session, and then on the next weekend I did 40 minutes. And then I kept doing 30 minutes as a session for a while, maybe for 2-3 weeks. And then while I was doing 40 minutes, 45 minutes kind of on the weekends once. And eventually I got to the point where I was rowing 40 minutes as kind of my base, and then 50 or 60 minutes was my longer session. And that was about when I kind of switched my focus to training to try to break those world records for the 1 minute, in which case rowing long distance was not helping me, and in fact it was hurting me. All right, because you don't really want to be putting in long endurance miles if you're training to sprint. All right, because they are kind of mutually exclusive in terms of what they're doing. So that was my kind of story, that was my kind of history. But feel comfortable where you are and build from where you are. All right, don't hear someone saying, well, I'm rowing 60 minutes at a time and you should be rowing 60 minutes at a time, and you're like, well, I'm only rowing 20-30 minutes at a time, but I guess I can kind of get through 60 minutes, do 60 minutes and just kind of slaw through and just kind of be excruciating and want to be anywhere but there once you get 40-50 minutes in, and then just not sustain it because you're not enjoying your rowing anymore. All right, so that is kind of my talk about how to build your training volume and why you should be building your training volume, with a rant here or there along the way that hopefully can kind of bring you guys into line with kind of my way of thinking if you're open to doing so, or at least kind of respect that way of thinking if you kind of tend in another direction. But that's it. Hopefully this was helpful. I've actually recorded probably an hour and a half of takes on this because I keep going off direction or losing my focus. I am very glad to get to the end of this talk so I can go to the editing room and cut it together to share with you guys. But if you did find it helpful, please give it a like. If you have questions that I didn't cover in the video, put them down in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer those, and subscribe to this channel if you found this video helpful and you would like to hear more talks like this and consume more content to kind of help you with your own rowing. So that's it. This is Travis signing off. Take care, guys, and I'll catch you on the next video. Bye.